Hello, everybody, and welcome to the School of Atelier Arts and our free online class that we're giving right now on how to paint a sphere. Excuse me. So welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to have you here. And please let me know where you're checking in from. Say hello in the chat. More and more people are joining us from Facebook, so happy to have you here, as well as our YouTube following. Today, what we're going to do is we are going to be working on the light side of our sphere. So yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about that war, that separation between shadow and light. And today we're finally getting into what many of you probably thought we were going to do on day one, which is paint the sphere, right? So we're going to be covering a lot of different information today, and we're going to be using a technique for painting called tiling. And the idea behind tiling is that you put one note, we call it a note, down at a time in a line that follows the form. Now, if everything I just said sounds completely insane to you, do not worry. I will explain every step along the way. And I'm looking forward to getting into it today with you. So just a little bit of a review of what we've done so far in our previous videos. We drew our sphere. We drew the division between our back plane, ground plane, front plane. We drew this division between the light and the shadow. So when you have a sphere or any form, what's happening is that there's an exact place where the light turns to shadow. The form itself is turning away from the light. If we look at our sphere here, there's an exact place where this is light and the sphere is turning away from light, turning away from light, turning away from light. And there's an exact place where that form itself is turning away from the light. That is creating what we call a form shadow here. And this form shadow is a slightly darkened band that's caused by both the form turning away from the light, but also yesterday we talked about how light was bouncing on the surface and back into the sphere. But the further the light has to go, the darker it is. And so this bouncing light has to travel so far by the time it gets here that it's actually quite dark. And this is what creates the illusion of a dark band, or also known as our core shadow. Some people call it a bed bug line. Let me know if you've ever heard that phrase before. It's one of my favorite little tidbits of atelier lore. And the reason they call it a bed bug line is because when you were a poor student studying in an atelier in Paris, right, you couldn't afford the nicer accommodations necessarily. And bed bugs, if you turn down your covers, if they don't like the light, they run into the dark, right? And so they call it the bed bug line because the bed bugs only want to be on the dark side. So it's atelier lore that during, studying the Atelier des Beaux-Arts or the École des Beaux-Arts and other ateliers in France, that this line became known as the bed bug line. So however you think of it, hopefully you won't forget it. Excuse me. And good morning to as many of our returning students. Good to see you, Ellen and Leola. Welcome back. Okay, I see in the chat, tiling is completely new to me. Looking forward to this. Me too. I mean, it's not new to me, but I'm looking forward to it. That part. That's the part I'm excited about. I love tiling. People tend to develop a love-hate with tiling because it takes a lot of thought to do well. And it can be frustrating for students when they are first coming into to tiling method because it takes some practice before you stop getting lost in your tiles. So I personally really struggled with learning tiling. I cried almost every day when I was learning tiling. And my hope for you is that I've developed some processes for teaching this that will make it slightly less painful for you. Welcome, Carol. Oh my goodness, from Panama City with snow. That's insane to me. It's a crazy world right now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to tile. In order to tile, we need to set up our palette. In order to set up our palette, we need to create our 9-step value scale. Okay, so I have mixed a 9-step value scale the same way we did in our second video. So if you want more information on how to do this, please see episode 2 of how to paint a sphere. Oh, welcome, Marguerite from Virginia. Welcome, welcome. It's so nice. I see so many returning faces day after day while we're doing this, and it's really wonderful to build that community and see, some of the similar faces each day. That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm using a 9-step value scale. You can see how I did this in episode number 2. So our 1 is our white, our 9 is our black, and we have these steps in between. Just a quick review, it's best to mix halfway and then the halfway between the halfway and then the halfway between the halfway points, right? This allows us to get an even transition from dark to light. A lot of times students are prone to mixing the 9 and then the 8 and then the 7. And what happens is that makes their whole string really, really dark. And then it's like really, really dark over here and then suddenly white, right? So we want even steps of change all the way from our 1 to our 9. Welcome, Lisa. Good to see you. Okay, so what I want to do when I'm mixing a string is just like before, I want to have a plan, right? You need to know where you're starting and where you're going. I'm going to start in the shadow. It's always a good idea to start from the shadow side. I don't know why, but when you have the shadow painted already, you have a reference point and it makes it easier to grab on to a place in your painting. If you just start randomly in some random island in the middle of a white canvas, you're losing the benefit of referencing colors that you've already put down, right? Because all color, all values are relative. The same value is going to look different surrounded by white than it is if I were to put that same exact color over here, right? So everything's relative. So when you start your tiling, if you start from the shadow side, you at least have some reference for what value you need to move into the light. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create a band of tiles from the shadow to the light. All right. Now, here's something that a lot of people misunderstand or don't realize, especially when painting a sphere. So I'm going to rotate you back here and we're going to talk about this. Okay. So this is our core shadow line. We talked about that already this morning. And as the sphere turns towards the light, it's getting brighter. So we're at the core shadow. It's getting lighter, 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 lighter. Highlight is here. Okay, the highlight is where your subject is most perpendicular to your light source, right? So if you were to stick something straight out of that highlight towards your light source, whatever part of the surface of the sphere that's most perpendicular to light source is going to have the highlight. And guess what? The sphere's turning away from the light on this side. This is the part that students mess up all the time, all right? So we're starting in the dark. We're getting lighter, 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 lighter. Our lightest part is the highlight. And then guess what? It's getting a little bit darker as it turns away because the sphere is spherical. It's turning away from the light in all directions. So it's getting darker in this way, and this way, and this way, and especially this way. This edge, people never darken, and then it creates this flatness of the sphere. But the lightest part, the part that is closest to our light source, is way over here. Look how much space we have between where the lightest light of our sphere is and where we stop seeing that edge turning away from us. All right. So I hope I'm making sense here, because what we're going to do today is we're going to follow a path to our highlight, to our brightest bit, and then further away from it. So sometimes I like to just make a little mark for where my highlight is. Okay, keep in mind that there's a slight difference between where you guys are seeing and where I am seeing. So if you're seeing the highlight in a slightly different place, don't panic. When I am looking at this actually on the screen, this is a problem with cameras and videos, especially when dealing with white stuff. When I'm seeing it on the screen, to you guys, it doesn't look like it's getting darker on this edge because often video and technology will unify the light into just one color. So you guys aren't really seeing the highlight, but you know it must be true because of what you know about form. And Carol saying, I never understood highlights. Yes. So highlights, if you just think about highlights as a part of anything that you're painting, that is most perpendicular to your light source, it's a good way to find them, and it's a good way to paint them accurately. You know, we're always going back and forth between what we know must be true and what we observe. So right now, you guys are observing almost this whole light area as just one value. But what you know must be true is that the form is turning away as it goes because it's a sphere, and a sphere turns form in all directions. Okay, so my highlight is approximately here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a band that's going do 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 to my highlight, and then is continuing to darken as it hits the far edge. So we're kind of pretending we're a little ant crawling across the form, and we're going up like a slight hill, reaching the top where the highlight is, and then going back down the hill on the other side. All right, I'm going to darken this a little bit so that you guys can see it. I don't want to make it too dark because we're going to be painting light and I don't want it to show through underneath, but I do want you to be able to see what we're doing. All right. So I'm going to start here in my shadow, and I'm going to work across my form here. Now, you want a paintbrush that is proportionate to what you're working on. My little brush is probably a little too small, so I'm going to use this brush. It's maybe a touch big, but because this is a demo, I want to make sure that you're seeing each note that I put down. So I'm going to exaggerate a tiny bit on the big side by using this brush just for clarity in the demonstration. All right, so I'm going to grab my palette. All right, now we know that this core shadow is fairly dark. It's not quite as dark as what's under here, but it's darker than anything in my form shadow on this side. So I'm going to pick a color that's probably like an 8-ish. And I'm just going to lay it down. Now, I'm not going to smudge it around. When you tile, you want one clean note. So I'm just going to put one clean note down. I don't quite have enough paint on my paintbrush. All right, so this is one note, one tile. This brush is a little bit big. That's a pretty big tile. I'm debating whether I want to go smaller, but it's reading really well in the video, so I'm going to go with it. All right. Okay, so this is our core shadow. Now, our core shadow does have a soft edge. So if I go one note lighter on my canvas and lay down a tile on this side, it'll kind of start softening that edge into the shadow here. Now, on this side, it's really light, right? And so I need to start with light values on this side. When I blended, just as a quick side note, when I blended this, I covered up a fair amount of that dark. So I'm going to go just restate this because the core shadow needs to be in the middle of that line, and it got pushed to the left of that line. All right. Now, I want to use my light colors. Remember that division between war and shadow. But I don't want to make this really sudden jump from this value 8 to my 6. So I'm going to very, very suddenly, and I'm going to do this with overlapping tiles. I'm just going to quickly overlap the slightly lighter color here and go right to my 6 now. Okay, so that 7 is basically creating the soft edge, and now I can overlap my 6 on top of it. Now, when we're pulling out of the shadow, these are called midtones, and we don't have a lot of space to pull out of the midtones because we need to get to our lighter colors pretty quick. So you'll see that I'm overlapping pretty quickly, in part because I'm using a big brush here. All right. Okay, so we have our darker value, and then I have 3 tiles overlapping pretty quickly. Now, the bigger the brush you use, the more you're going to have to overlap. If you use a smaller brush, you don't have to overlap as much. But I'm just going to continue lightening as I work towards my highlight here. All right, so this is one step that didn't really look too much lighter. I think we need to lighten it a little bit more. Okay, and we're working our way across our value scale, getting lighter and lighter as we start heading towards our highlight. Okay, and I'm just going to show you my palette really quick here. So I started around here and I'm just working across. You're going to need values in between, like, this value between my 3 and my 4 is here, my value between my 2 and my 3, etc. Okay, so I'm continuing to tile, and the goal is by the time I get to my X, that I will be at my pure white. Okay, tiling is a slow process. You have to be patient. Occasionally, you might put a bad tile down. You need to be careful about correcting it until it's the color that you want it to be. All right, so I'm getting close, and I'm close to hitting my pure white on my palette, which is good because I'm also near my X. So this is just a tiny bit darker than my white. And now I'm approaching my X. I'm going to my pure white. That was a lot of paint. I don't know why I put that much paint on my brush. I'm going to take a little bit of the paint off. I don't need quite so much. I think I was worried that my X wouldn't get covered. Okay, I'm seeing that there was a fairly large jump between my last value and the highlight. So I'm going to mix a color that is in between my white and that last color that I had. Just so it's not so sudden of a jump. Okay, so we've traveled all the way from our shadow into our light, and now we need to travel across the other edge. So I'm going back in time now, or back to slightly darker values as I work across the sphere to the other side. It's not a big difference, but that far edge is turning away. And we want to make sure to show that with the form painting. Now, something's about to happen. Can anybody tell me what's about to happen with my next tile? Does anybody know what I need to start worrying about? Oh, there's a great question in the chat. How am I keeping my values clean? So every time that I am taking a note, I put it down, and then I'm wiping the note off in my brush, or wiping my brush off, right? So between every single tile, I'm wiping as much paint as I can off so that they don't pollute each other. Okay, and Leola, you are exactly right. I'm about to approach my edge. I don't want to lose my edge. And also, I have two colors about to meet. So I need to figure out what kind of edge I want. Do I want a soft edge? Do I want hard edge? Do I want something in between? So as I put this next color down, I want to be really, really mindful that I don't mess up my edge. And to me, it's feeling like a pretty sharp edge. So I can put my color down carefully with a sharp edge, right? But don't just meet colors, right, without thinking about your edge. Always, always, always consider what your edge is going to do. This brush is a little flayed. I'm a little worried. I might need my smaller brush to really get this. I'm going to get my smaller brush because I'm meeting that edge. And I just want to be so careful here. But I also want to make sure, oops, I just overstepped my edge slightly. Because I just overstepped it, I immediately want to fix it. So I'm going back to my darker color. And then I overstepped it the other way, going back to my lighter color. Okay, do you see how careful and mindful we have to be about our edges? Okay, so this is what we call our first pass. So congratulations. I'm hoping that you're starting to see how the form is emerging across here. Lisa's saying this is so new me. I can't wait to see what you're doing. Well, you're going to get to see me do it until this whole sphere is covered. We probably aren't going to get through all of it today because, as you saw, it's a little bit of a time-consuming process. But as we do each band, a lot of people will start, okay, the next band goes here, right? But that's not what we want to do. We want to always be crossing through our highlight because we want to work across forms, not against forms. So every band is going to start wide and get a little skinnier, meet the first band we did, and then come out the other side. All right. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry. I'm literally going to show you how we're doing that right now. Okay, so the other thing to think about is no two tiles are the same. A lot of times my students will be like, okay, I'm doing the next band, just match this color, then match this color, then match this color, et cetera, et cetera. But remember that the further something is away from the light, the darker it has to be, right? So this part of our sphere is actually further away from the light source just a little bit than this part of the sphere. And this part of the sphere is definitely further away from the light source than this part of the sphere. Do you see how much lower down it is? So no two bands are the same. So this is our main guiding band, but this next band is going to be the slightest bit darker. This is going to be even slightly darker. This is going to be even slightly darker. And by the time we get to this top edge here, we know that that edge is going to be dark like that, and it's going to get darker the further away from the light it gets. All right, so it's really important to understand that form turns in all directions and to constantly be mindful of our rule that the further away something is from the light source, the darker it's going to be. All right. It's not going to be too big of a difference on this next band. So this next band is going to start here and cross through our highlight and go over here. So let's start that one. All right. So I'm getting my darker color. All right. So again, I'm going to start on my core shadow line. I'm going to put one stroke on the other side to soften the shadow because it's a soft edge, that core shadow. Because it's lighter up here, I might need one more slightly lighter stroke just to connect it to what's there already. All right. I messed up this part of my core shadow. I'm just restating that. All right, so this on the shadow side, I'm just trying to create the soft edge. I can also do it the way that I used to, which is just kind of fuzzing that edge out. But I find that when I'm trying to teach tiling, if I switch between techniques, sometimes that can be confusing. So the first way I did it was just tiling. I'm going to do it that way the rest of the time, but I want to show you how you can transition between techniques as well. Okay, so I'm pulling out of my core shadow across my form, one note at a time. And remember that these notes are going to overlap, but that overall, I need them to read slightly darker than what came before it. That's probably a little exaggerated with how dark. It's a little sneakier once you start kind of connecting your tiles together. So I don't want it to be crazy dark, but it does need to read just a slightly bit darker. Keep in mind too that we're putting our best guesses down here, and eventually, after we get the first pass down, almost certainly we're going to end up doing a second pass. I was like, I knew you were going to say that, but I don't know what I said that you're responding to. Sorry, I didn't see it right away. But that just means you've been training with me a while, if you know what I'm about to say. All right, so again, I'm meeting this other set of tiles here, and I'm crossing through the center, and now I'm going to pull out on this side slightly. I guess I could extend that just a little bit just to really exaggerate this idea of the crossing. Okay, so pulling out the other side of this. Remember that it's darker. Probably not that dark. That's too dark. Not that much darker. There we go. Okay, and it's about time to get my little brush back. And again, I want this edge sharp at this part of my sphere. It'll get softer as it turns back this direction, but right here, it's nice and sharp and beautiful. Okay, that pass didn't take us quite as long because we weren't putting as many tiles, right? We were going across this way. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working upwards. And so this next pass is going to start here, cut through our highlight, and go out this way. It does help to use the right brush. If I had been tiling this whole thing with this tiny brush, uh, it's going to be a million more tiles, right? So try to use a brush that's proportionate to the space you need covered. Okay, now again, everything's a little darker as it comes up here. I'm going to soften it on the shadow side here. Again, overlapping tiles. I didn't clean my brush as well that time. Do you see how it has a darkness on the edge? That happened because I didn't clean my brush very well. Okay, and again, we're trying to cross through the center here, so I need to overlap these other tiles a little bit more. Okay, we're gonna call that good on this side. And then I need to pull out over here. Oh, that was a dirty brush. It also helps when you have a newer brush. This brush I'm using is a little bit large and the bristles are flayed just a little bit. And that's, for whatever reason, that tends to make for a less clean tile. Oops, that's too dark. I'm gonna get my smaller brush anyways, because once again, we're approaching the edge here. I need to lighten this tile. That was too dark. Okay, now something's starting to happen, and I'm wondering if you guys can see it. Even though I'm following my line on this outside edge, doesn't it look like this part is bulging a little bit? That's actually an illusion. um, because we're starting to see the form here and then it's flat where we haven't painted it. So this really bothers students sometimes, and sometimes they're really tempted to paint this edge in, losing this really careful edge because there's this optical illusion that this part is bulging when we get to this face. Um, okay, I see a couple questions in the chat. Why are you going diagonally? Easier to match values? It's because I always want to go towards the highlight, through the highlight, and back the other side. This way, you're always working across the form. If I just go across this way, then I tend to lose the illusion of the form. If I work always through the center, it helps maintain that this is the lightest. It gets lighter going to it. It gets darker going away from it. What's the darkest value on the light edge? I'll show you here. My darkest value is somewhere right around my 2 to 2.5, maybe. So these are all good questions. Okay. So we have 3 passes or 3 rows here. I'm trying to decide how to best do this because I want to split this between 2 days so that we aren't rushed. I think what I'm going to do for the rest of today is I'm going to go just to the center from the outside of the sphere and finish the top of the sphere, because there's a lot to talk about how it's pulling out here differently than how it's pulling out from up here. And so we'll save that for tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go from this edge all the way around the sphere to my center, and that's going to be what we do today. Okay, back over here. And again, look how much darker this area of our sphere is for longer because there's so much more space. Look at this distance, how much longer this distance is than the distance here, right? And that means that it's going to stay darker longer. So again, restating my core shadow first. That might have been a little aggressively dark. Okay, I want to show you something. Why did I make that too dark? I'll tell you exactly why I made that too dark. Look, I have pile, 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 pile. Oh, look, I used up my pile here. So what did I do? I aired it on the side where I had more paint. And what do you know? I made it too dark. Why? Because I was being lazy and I didn't stop to mix up my pile. So I'm going to take a little time out and remix my 8 so that I don't do dumb things like use the wrong color just because it's there on my palette. These are like the kinds of habits that you'll catch yourself doing, sometimes. And then you're like, why did my painting go bad? Why did it go too dark? Well, look at your palette. Do you have any light colors left on your palette if it's getting too dark? Okay, I have remixed my 8. So hopefully I'm not tempted by the evil studio fairies to make things too dark. So step 1, let's lighten this a touch. Step 2, let's soften it into what's there. I am going to soften this out. All right, I'm going to restate it because I lost my dark. It's hard, right? It's hard to maintain this overall curvature of the core shadow. Did you see how it got moved over this way? And all of a sudden our line started going whoop. Okay. Now I'm going to start pulling out. All right. I just exaggerated too far light there. So I'm going to restate my core shadow one more time. And now I'm ready to work my way out. Remember that we have more time before we get to the center. So that means we're going to stay a little bit darker for a little bit longer. And even if you don't have paint at home, you can do this with pencil, right? This is a value lesson. So don't let your lack of paint deter you. Oops, that was too much of a jump to light. Well, maybe not. That feels okay when I stand back. All right, now we need to make sure that we're getting light enough by the time we hit the center. Okay, now I'm just going to keep working these bands from the outside edge to the center. We'll finish up the core shadow first, and then we're going to break our rule and start going from the far edge just to finish this top part of the sphere today. I'm just reading the comments here because I've got sucked into my tiling and I haven't been following what's going on in the chat here. So I use up what I have for anything I don't put enough out. It's so wrong. Yes. I mean, I just did it. Like I'm trying to be on my best behavior demoing for you guys, and I just used up my pile of paint, right? And then put the wrong color down. And so Carol's saying that one of her early teachers said to put out 2 times what you need so you don't have to mix when you're in the middle of painting. And yeah, at the end, like I know it's hard to waste paint or feel like we're wasting paint, but I'd rather have a little bit of excess at the end than make a bad painting because I didn't have what I needed on my palette. Those are good thoughts in the chat here. Okay, I'm going to go back to this. So rendering, this is considered rendering, this kind of form painting. And you're both observing and, using what you know must be true on this kind of painting. My light just shifted as we expect around this time. So I'm going to arrange my screens appropriately. Okay. Back to it then. Now, I'm hoping, actually, when I'm looking at it on the screen, it's looking pretty even. But I'm going to shove you guys as close to the painting as I can get you. I want you to see that you're actually seeing each individual color, right, when you're up close here. Not sure what just happened there. Did you guys see the close-up? I accidentally left the studio somehow. I'm gonna put it back up there and hopefully not do what I just did, which whatever that was. But do you see how clearly you can see the different tiles up close, but how from a distance it's reading much more smooth? Sometimes it really upsets students to see each individual tile, but for your first pass, try to keep your notes as clean as possible, right? It's more important that you see each note cleanly, paint each note cleanly. The second pass is for smoothing things out. The first pass is to get your freaking notes right. Okay, so back to what we were doing. Back to my plentiful pile of 8, which is mixed on my palette with no skimping. Um, It's gonna get tricky when we get up here because the core shadow is actually a little bit broader here at the top, and we also wanna make sure not to lose this edge. But keep in mind that it's a little darker up here because it's so far away from that bouncing light, right? This bouncing light is coming from here and here, but you see how far it has to travel to get all the way up here. I think I made it a little bit lighter because I was trying to maintain the edge up here. And it is lighter than what's behind it. The real problem might be that the background is a little bit light there. But we're gonna keep it as is, and I'm just gonna make this a little darker in order for us to maintain that silhouette. And then when we do our second pass, we'll figure out whether it's the sphere that needs to be lighter or the background needs to be darker. This is a problem for a different day. We don't need to fuss with this right now. We're focused on this. It can be so hard. Like I was starting to get sucked into this, right? This top edge. It's so hard to stay focused on what you're doing, but the more discipline you have to stay focused on what you're intending to do in that moment, the better your processes will help you make good paintings. Okay. So how many passes are needed? That's a great question in the chat. It depends on your skill level and it depends on your experience. I hate to break it to you. I'm gonna show my face because this is sad news. It will take a couple attempts at a sphere before you don't lose the outward sphere and make a giant mess. It takes a little bit of experience, especially if you've never tiled before, especially if grisaille painting is new to you. It's going to take a couple attempts. So go into it knowing, hey, I'm just trying to practice something. I'm trying to learn something. I'm not trying to make a perfect painting. And I'm going to focus on keeping my spherical shape. But if I lose it, that's okay because it's probably going to take a little bit of practice, right? So go into it with the attitude of, okay, it's going to be some practice. Now, if you're an experienced painter, 2 passes is usually enough to get a pretty refined surface. That being said, it depends on what your acceptable level of refinement is. Some artists that I know and love and make beautiful work are completely obsessive. They'll do 5, 6, 7, 8 passes because every pass they can get it a little bit more refined, a little bit more refined, a little bit more refined. Me personally, I'm not like the OCD kind of painter. I'm kind of the painter that likes to just like throw up what I see onto the canvas and refine it where I feel like it needs refined, but I'm much more interested in the big ideas and I feel like sometimes especially in your 7th or 8th pass you lose the gesture, particularly in a figure. So I'm more interested in the big ideas and maintaining the big ideas. And so I prefer fewer passes. Whereas, some people are really into high level refinement. Ong comes to mind. He was obsessive, right? But there's both obsessive painters, looser painters, everything in between. Like some of you might be a 5-layer painter, some of you might be, a 10-layer painter or a 2-layer painter. It's going to vary depending on what level of refinement suits you. That being said, I try to push my students to be as refined as I can possibly push them so that they have that skill set and they can always pull it back if they need to, but they'll never not be able to take something to a really high level if they want to. Um, so these tiles kind of remind me of Cezanne's method of painting a little bit. Keep in mind that a lot of what we consider the early modernist painters were really just showing atelier skills. This is actually a fun little tangent, a fun little side note. So think of Mondrian, the painter, right? He did those like red and yellow and blue squares, right? But if you look at his work, he was classically trained, and then he went through a transition period where he was trying to withdraw the essence of a painting. And, a lot of historians will say, oh, the traditionalists hated Mondrian because he was so unique and modern. And that's not exactly the case. Keep in mind that atelier training was like each atelier was basically a trade secret. They were competing for the same commissions. They were competing for everything, and you didn't want to give away your trade secrets, like how you're painting. They would never give a demo to a live square about what I'm giving you right now, right? You would go to the atelier, become part of that secret atelier's in club, and learn those things. But Mondrian, like if you look at the transitionary work, he was basically showing all the trade secrets. Like he was showing the block-ins of what the paintings were, of how he had learned how to paint. That's what made people mad, is that he was giving away trade secrets. They didn't care that he was a modernist. Um, so anyways, a little side note. But the same with Cezanne, right? Like he was focused on planes. He was interested a little bit in seeing things from different locations, and he was interested in clean notes, right? Not so different from this technique. Um, okay. Yeah, and yes, for the warning, I shouldn't even be trying to learn how to paint, like, if you mess up your first sphere. No, like, I don't know anybody that sat down and did a sphere perfectly the first time. It actually is a highly, highly skilled art to paint a sphere that actually looks spherical. Your first spheres are gonna look a little dented. You're gonna be tempted at one point to smear all these tiles together, and you're gonna lose your form, right? Like, there's like little gremlins tempting you to do naughty things, when you're painting a sphere. And it takes a few times. I honestly think you have to paint your first sphere in order to gain the confidence of understanding the process, even if it's a total disaster. Like, once it's so scary when you just have this white canvas and you're like, you have 3 tiles down and you're like, oh, is this right? Is this wrong? This looks crazy. I'm afraid. I'm scared. Right. But once you tile a whole sphere, even if it's a complete disaster, even if you totally lose your edges, you have that experience in your brain that what it looks like before and how it looks like mid and how it looks like at the end. Every painting has an awkward teenager face. This is the awkward teenager face of our sphere, right? And there's some mistakes. Like there's a tile here that's darker than the ones around it, right? But just leave it be. Put your best guess down. The cleanup is for this next pass. Oh yeah, everybody's tempted to blend. In fact, I know very few students who manage to tile a sphere the first time without giving into that temptation. And then they're like, "Oh, why doesn't it look right?" And that's also how you lose your edges, right? When you get frustrated and you just want to blend one square and then you mess that up and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the next thing you know, you've done this to your whole sphere. So try to avoid that. Okay. It looks like I'm actually going to stop here for today. It's going to take us probably 3 days. I was ambitious to think I could do it in 2. So tomorrow we'll continue working across the top. And then after we finish that, start working on the bottom. And then we'll start talking about potential second passes on things. Okay. Woo! All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. It's always lovely to see you. Again, my name is Mandy Tice. I'm the director of the School of Atelier Arts. I run an online atelier, which I encourage you to check out. You can learn more at theschoolofatelierarts.com. We meet 2 days a week and we learn stuff like this all day, every day, right? That's what we do in the online atelier. So, thank you all for being here. Have a lovely day, and I hope to see you at 9 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow.